The Enlightenment is more so talked about as a philosophical period or a period of ideas, much more in a general humanities sense typically. But I did want to talk about it with you and show you a few of the art pieces that we consider Enlightenment inspired, let us say. Again, sometimes when you're looking up Enlightenment, like on the internet, you'll run into this giant discussion where they roll in Rococo and Neoclassical and everything else. So I want to be very, very clear that I'm speaking about Rococo, Enlightenment, and the Neoclassical as three separate movements because they are. But all of those movements did have some inspiration from the Enlightenment. I'd say Rococo very little. In Neoclassical, yes, we'll have some influence of Enlightenment values, but I think there's some artists that we can look at that aren't Neoclassical, let us say, but again, do take from this new spirit of more scientific focus and the focus on new morality, as we would say. So, again, if you're looking at other sources, you might say this gets a little confused, but I think the best thing you can do is consider the concepts of enlightenment here and a few of the art pieces that go along with it. And then we'll talk about neoclassicism as an art movement. So we'll talk more about neoclassical thought specifically through the lens of art. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, the Enlightenment period comes out of course, the frivolity of the Rococo. So we were hanging out in the Rococo, and one of the things I mentioned was, it's all about fun, it's all about pleasure, it's all about sexiness, happiness, freedom. And just like this swing, right, in the famous painting The Swing, all things have to swing in one direction, and all things have to swing back in another direction. So, as I sort of alluded to me, the Rococo is all like cotton candy. It's fun. So you're stuffing the sugar in your face. But eventually you'll have to eat your broccoli. And I say this with tongue in cheek because I mentioned Fragonard to me. They look like broccoli trees. So you have, your dessert, but, you need to eat your veggies too. So we're going to swing from the dessert, the cotton candy, right back towards the veggies and leave this fun frivolity behind. To me, boohoo, right? Bye, Rococo, because I love Rococo so much. But we have to get serious again, right? And one of the things I think the Enlightenment is really known for is its focus on science. And, over time, hopefully you've noticed in this course, they keep edging further away from faith-based thinking. They keep edging further away from religion and from things that they find unprovable. And this is because there's a boom in scientific thought happening at the end of the 1700s into the 1800s. And this painting, for me, sums it up rather well. Where before this, you might see a painting or a sculpture that deals with the unfathomable, right? The unexplainable, let's say. I always kind of contrast this work in my mind with Bernini's Ecstasy of St. Teresa, where it's something that Teresa said she saw, right? It's a vision. But again, it's not something provable, right, in the concrete sense. It's all based on faith. And then you look at this painting by Joseph Wright of Derby, and you're seeing the exact opposite. You're seeing an experiment. In this case, it's an experiment with an air pump. So you'll note in the center of the painting, you have this mechanism, which is literally an air pump. You can pump air into it, and you can take the air away. And what they've done for this experiment is put a bird inside the air pump. Today, PETA would definitely not approve of this. But they put the bird in the air pump, and they're trying to prove that we need oxygen to live by removing it from the vessel, and hence, of course, the bird collapses, and then reintroducing it into the vessel, and of course, the bird revives, comes back, starts breathing. So this idea of taking the air away and putting the air back in, and the idea, like with an experiment, of course, scientifically, is you can repeat it over and over and over again with the same results. That's the key to why we do scientific experiment, right? If you can do something over and over with the same results, then it's provable. So this painting's all about concrete information, visible results, and being able to prove to somebody this is what happens when you do this thing. Now, again, I think you can intersect that with faith-based thought, because before, the bird coming back to life, I'm kind of using air quotes with my hands, right? The bird reviving when the oxygen is introduced, I bet in the past it would have been viewed as a miracle, right? They would have said, oh, the bird came back to life, it's a miracle. Now through the lens of science, of course, they're like, no, it's not a miracle, it's provable. Science, evidence, yeah, it's empirical fact. We can do this over and over again, right? And tell you it's the truth. Um, but it shows you the different road that culture is going down and how art is going along with it, right? They're not really as interested in religion or faith, miracles, right? And they're turning away from that and they're saying, we want concrete information, right? We want concrete evidence. And this is how we can get it, right? Through experiments. Notice that not everybody in this painting is on board. One of the things you'll see in Enlightenment thought and also in neoclassical thought is a very gender-separated idea of how the sexes relate or react to things. Men are usually pitched as very rational, very public, very much the doers in their society. And women are often shown as frail and emotional and sad and scared. And so you'll notice here the two girls, the one girl can't even look, right? And her companion, her father, I'd assume, is like, no, look, we're about to put the air back in. Honey, it's science, right? And she's sort of like, no, not the bird, right? So this sort of contrast between his rationality and her emotions is something you see quite a bit of in the Enlightenment. So again, you can see that at play. The last thing I want to mention is if you look at the way that the painting is styled, it looks very much like a Caravaggio painting. So sometimes when we see a new movement come into play, it's not like they have to do anything technically that's revolutionary. Sometimes they just recycle stuff from the past. So when I look at Rite of Derby, to me, quite obviously, he's looking at a Caravaggio-esque setup right to the painting. But again, I think this painting helps us understand the scientific road we're going to walk down now and how we're leaving, right, sort of the faith-based idea of things behind. Another thing you can look at from the Enlightenment to really prove this out is you can look at things like the encyclopedia. This was invented or created by Diderot, right, a French thinker. And basically, the reason he introduced it is he said there should be a cataloging of all human information from A to Z. Everything we know, everything we understand, we should logically write that down in a systematic fashion. Now, this is a great idea, but someone in the humanities like me would tell you, can you ever truly be objective? I don't know about that. And what you might think is relevant information worthy of documentation might change from time to time. So, for instance, I use the image on the left because I don't think any of us would care today about all the different kinds of wigs you could wear. This would be a little outdated for us. But we may care about something else. All the different types of cell phones you might be able to buy. I could see, people today wanting that. What are my options, right? So I would argue with him that it's a valiant effort, right? But I think, again, you can't always predict what information is valuable through the test of time. And I also think that you can't be completely objective about information. There's always subjectivity in how you look at information. You can't get away from that, no matter how objective you think you are. And there's always an emotionality to certain things too. And that's why I gave you the skeleton on the right, because it's anatomy. It's an anatomy drawing. But I've never seen such a contemplative skeleton in all my life, right? It seems an odd way to show you what's supposed to be objective information. So for all that Diderot is promoting regarding rationality and cataloging and objective information, again, there's always going to be flaws that you have to acknowledge about this kind of project, I think we'd say. And the Enlightenment is also really, really well known for the shifting that's happening regarding church and state at this time. We already talked a little bit about like science versus religion, right? So here it's church versus state. What we're seeing happening in governments is that they're moving away from the church having a lot of control, and they're also starting to move a lot away from one person having control. Like the idea of a king, let's say, like you're seeing here in this image. This is King Louis Philippe of France, or as he was known, his nickname, the pear, Le Poire, right? The pear, because he looks like a pear if you look at him. This is actually a much later artwork from our time period we're talking about right now. This is actually Daumier, and he's a realist. So this is mid 1800s actually, so about 100 years in the future. But I like what it illustrates to think about this. So again, in the Enlightenment period, it's all about rationality, it's all about objectivity, right? Understanding things. And so they're sort of like, well, the church makes no sense. We don't need that. And they're like, does it make sense for us to have one ruler who tells us what to do? You know? Shouldn't mankind have more of a voice? Aren't we objective and rational enough as men to make our own rules? So if you follow political history, you know, of course, I'm sure you know this is the time period of like Hobbes and Locke and those conversations. And of course, the revolutions, right? You have the French Revolution and the American Revolution, and the idea that men can rule themselves, right? That they can create a compact between themselves, right? They don't need a ruler to tell them what to do. And again, I think this art image lets us see what they're damning about these rulers. Like, what do they find so unappealing? And I think they started to see the rulers as big fat cats sitting on their thrones, eating and eating and eating and taking and taking and taking, and just shitting out laws. Because in the image, that's what's happening. He's sitting on a commode in the French tradition. It's a toilet. And you'll notice he's shitting laws out the underneath, right? He's taking from everybody and shitting out horrible laws. It's one of my favorite prints ever. It just cracks me up. But again, I think it's important to understand this issue of church and state and government that's also roiling at this time. Final thing I want to mention as context to lead us through the next pieces of art, and then also talking about the neoclassical movement as well, is the impact of the Industrial Revolution. Before this, work was really something that the individual did, and objects that were made were handmade. They were unique. So if you lived in a village, right, there was probably one or two people who made vases, right, or vases. And those people were considered craftspeople or artisans, and they basically created these unique pieces. It took much longer, of course, to create individual artworks or art objects like this. And I like showing you vases because they're aesthetic or beautiful, but they're also practical or utilitarian. They're useful. So they're an interesting kind of object to bridge the divide between art and utility, right? They fall in both camps. So the Industrial Revolution's like, do you really want to wait around while that one guy makes your vase? Hey, we can do it better. We can automate this. And this is when industry is really born, when factories are born and automation is born. The Wedgwood vase you're seeing in this image was the first type of automated art piece that was made. There was literally like a production line that this went down where, the vase was made, it was stamped, it was fired, it was colored, it was decorated, everything was done automated down the line. And they were made in bulk, which is the hallmark of the Industrial Revolution, being able to make a lot more things a lot quicker and a lot cheaper. So if you go to a Target or a Walmart, you can thank the Industrial Revolution for all this cheap stuff that you can buy. That's fairly disposable now, cheap, easy, and when it comes to fashion, fast fashion, we call it. You buy it, it's trendy, you discard it in 6 months. This is all thanks to the Industrial Revolution. And I would say the Industrial Revolution is also important to understand because it affects our view of time and what time means for us as workers. Before this, the guy making the vase probably could take his time. He'd get up, work a little bit, have a little lunch, maybe hang out with the wife for a little bit, go walk down to the pub, come back later, do a little more work. We get the impression that the days weren't very stressful. Then the Industrial Revolution comes in, and it's you basically have a time card. You clock in, you clock out. And I really feel that's still how time works today. We often see employers judging productivity linked to time at work rather than product that's created, right? Or this idea of logging in and logging out, right? I even think about it when I teach classes in the physical classroom. This idea of like a class starting at 12:30 and ending at 1:45. Time is a construct, I always think it's funny if I let students out early, they seem shocked. And I'm like, well, we're done talking. Our conversation's done. Why would I hold you here doing nothing? I have respect for your time. And if we're done, we're done, you know? But this idea that, time is these units now, right? That's very industrial revolution. And again, impacts the way that we think about time and interact with time, especially when it comes to work. Hopefully, this gives you some context, right? Next, we'll look at the art pieces.